My name is Shan, and I'm writing this on behalf of a very close friend of mine. For privacy's sake, let's call him Kevin. Kevin, originally from East London, had been living a decent life. He'd recently moved into a cozy flat near Tower Hamlets, single for a few years but content. With some money saved up and time on his hands, he decided to try his luck with online dating. Little did he know, it would lead to the most terrifying experience of his life. It all started innocently enough. Kevin downloaded the usual apps like Tinder, Bumble, and a few others and spent his evenings swiping left and right. He wasn't the type to rush into anything, especially with all the stories of catfishing and scams he'd heard over the years. So when he matched with a stunning girl named Rochelle, he took his time. They chatted on the app for a week, exchanging witty banter, pictures, and even voice notes. She seemed real, too real. After ensuring she wasn't a figment of some cruel scam, Kevin felt confident enough to meet her in person. Their first date went off without a hitch. Rochelle showed up at a quaint little wine bar Kevin had picked. She was charming, funny, and even prettier in person. At the end of the night, she kissed him on the cheek, hopped into a cab, and sent him a sweet text about how much fun she'd had. Kevin went to bed that night thinking he'd hit the jackpot. A week later, Rochelle texted him again, this time inviting him over to her flat for drinks. Kevin hesitated. Meeting at her place seemed a bit rushed, but he reasoned that she must really like him to make such an offer. So, he agreed. That Sunday evening, Kevin arrived at her flat with a bottle of wine in hand. Rochelle greeted him warmly, ushering him inside her cozy apartment. The place was modest but inviting, with scented candles and soft music playing in the background. They shared stories over the wine, laughing and flirting, and Kevin felt like he was on cloud nine. When the first bottle was empty, Rochelle offered to open another. Kevin hesitated, knowing he had work the next morning, but her smile was persuasive. She returned with a cheap bottle she joked about, pouring them both another glass. Kevin took a sip, and the rest was a blur. Kevin woke up hours later on Rochelle's couch, but something was terribly wrong. He couldn't move. His arms and legs were bound tightly, and his head felt like it was underwater. Worst of all, he couldn't speak. He tried to shout but could only manage muffled groans. Panic surged through him as he realized he'd been drugged. The flat was eerily silent. Kevin strained to hear anything. Footsteps, voices. But there was nothing. Then the door burst open. For a brief moment, Kevin thought someone had come to rescue him, but the figure that entered shattered that hope. A man wearing a balaclava and gloves loomed over him, holding a knife that glinted menacingly in the dim light. The torture worked. Kevin managed to give up his phone's PIN, followed by the passwords to his banking apps. He could only watch helplessly as the man drained his accounts, transferring thousands of pounds to an unknown destination. Kevin's heart sank further when the man called the bank's fraud department, forcing him to authorize the transactions. By the end of the ordeal, Kevin had lost nearly everything. But it wasn't over. The man stepped out of the room again, leaving Kevin in a state of despair. When he returned, he was holding a spatula wrapped in a condom. Kevin's blood ran cold as the man explained his insurance policy. What followed was a violation so horrifying that Kevin refused to recount the details to anyone, even his closest friends. The man took pictures of the act, warning Kevin that if he went to the police, the photos would be sent to everyone he knew. Before leaving, the man leaned in close and whispered, "We know where you live, Kevin. Don't even think about running." It was then that Kevin realized Rochelle had been in on the whole thing. She'd fed the man every detail about him. His address, his habits, his vulnerabilities. This wasn't just a robbery, it was a meticulously planned attack. For weeks after the incident, Kevin withdrew from everyone. He stopped answering calls, skipped social outings, and rarely left his flat. When friends did see him, he was a shell of his former self, gone, jumpy and distant. His mental and emotional state deteriorated rapidly. The thought of reporting the crime haunted him, but the man's threats loomed larger. Every time he considered calling the police, he imagined those photos being plastered across social media or sent to his colleagues. His friends, including me, noticed the changes. At first, I chalked it up to work stress or a rough patch, but when I bumped into him at the supermarket, I knew something was seriously wrong. Kevin looked like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there was a haunted look in his eyes. I decided to confront him. One Saturday evening, I showed up at his flat unannounced. Kevin was hesitant to let me in, but I refused to leave until he talked to me. Over the next several hours, the dam broke. Kevin recounted everything, his voice trembling as he relived the nightmare. Hearing his story was devastating. The betrayal, the violence, the humiliation, as it was unimaginable. But what struck me the most was Kevin's resolve to keep it all bottled up. He felt trapped, unable to seek justice for fear of further harm. The weight of it all was crushing him. One day, Kevin surprised me by saying he wanted to share his story. Not for sympathy, but as a warning. He wanted others to know the dangers lurking in the world of online dating, to be cautious and vigilant. With his blessing, I wrote this account. For Kevin, the road to recovery is ongoing. He's still piecing his life back together, but he's stronger than he gives himself credit for. And while the scars of that night will never fully heal, sharing his story is a step toward reclaiming his power.